sure. July 15, 1924.
If we ask any questions you don't want to answer.
No,
just
I
say
don't
it.
care. My check. 2433 Garden Creek Road. 8260.
How long have you lived in Casco?
74 years. 73 and a half. Okay. Not right in Casper, but in this area. I was born in Tall Creek in a tent in the boom.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
So you're a lifelong resident. Can you tell us about your life here, Norma?
In Wyoming?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think originally the Liebeyer brothers came from Missouri to Wyoming to be cowboys. And they settled in the Lysite log cabin area. And my father worked for Okie, who has a beautiful home in Lysite called the Big Teepee. The Indians called it that. And somehow the lure of big money in the oil fields took him to the Salt Creek oil field.
And that was a big boom. And,
Oh,
yeah.
there was no place to live, and I was the fourth child in the family. We lived in a one-room tent, and my uncle lived with us up there in those days. It was a tough life. You know, the washboard and hauling water, old Model A, Model T cars. Mine was tough.
How long did you live in a one-room tent then?
I don't think over 2 years, probably.
How long were you in the Salt Creek oil field area then?
13 years.
Can you tell us, give us any background knowledge about, because we know about the oil boom in the, late teens and the 20s. Could you fill us in on the sandbar area, what you know about that?
I don't remember too much about the Sandbar area until maybe high school, and it was fun to go through there and look at all that was going on. It was a pretty wild place in the early 40s, and there were quite a few houses down there. And my first knowledge of ever knowing Shirley, her name was Williams, and it was Shirley Williams, and she had a laundry down, I believe, on about the corner of Spruce and First or 8th Street.
Do you remember the name of that laundry at all?
Then later, she had met John, and they were married, and I don't know, I think John was with the railroad when he came here, and they met. And they had what they called the Cozy Club, which was a wonderful place for steaks. That Shirley did most of the cooking in those days.
Where was it located?
On A Street, not terribly far from where the city and county offices are now.
The Cozy Club was a restaurant then?
Yeah, and a nightclub. And good music.
Who provided the music? I mean, was it?
It was mostly black people in the community, as far as I know. I don't know that I was down there that much.
How did you get to know Shirley?
Well, it's a strange story, and this goes back to
Sure.
our daughter Tina is now 38 years old, and when she was small, she liked everybody. It just didn't matter, and we were not aware of the fact that she was in the back seat of the car, waving at everybody that went by. And this couple, John and Shirley Gray, happened to follow us all over town that day because they couldn't get over this little girl waving at them. And I think Tina is the age of Maureen. Neenan. Is it Maureen? I believe that's her
No.
name. And they became attached to this little girl of ours. And I was quite surprised when Shirley called one day, told me who she was, and could she take Tina to lunch? And, oh, golly. Well, sure, I guess. So they took, it's not Maureen.
I don't remember.
Anyhow, they took these two little girls to lunch and took them to the park and fun, and they just had a ball. And it began more and more. Shirley and Tina became very good friends, and she'd call and say, could I take her down to the Holiday Inn for lunch? And I guess so, you know. I didn't know Shirley that well. I knew a lot about her, but she was a character, believe me. One day she called and said, it's St. Patrick's Day, and I'd like to take she and the Meenan girl to lunch. And I said, okay. She came to pick her up, and she said, I've got a darling little dress. She says, where is her green dress? I said, she doesn't have one. And she said, it's St. Patrick's Day. This child should have a green dress on. She was getting really irritated. And at that time, Carshawn's, the children's store, was open on Center Street. She went down and bought a green dress. Came back, and oh, I thought it was terrible. It was clear down by her ankles, but it was a green dress. I think I was getting a little cross at that point, and she was a character, and as she went out the door, she just howled. She said, now, Norma, you know we Irish have got to stick together. And I go, get out of here, you know.
How funny.
And they were so good to Tina.
They didn't have any children of their own?
No,
then?
I don't think that Shirley ever had children. I think she'd been married to somebody by the name of Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Shirley was born in Omaha,
Mm-hmm.
and I think she had a pretty rough childhood. What brought her to Wyoming, I don't know. Then one Christmas Eve, John was a huge man, so poor, and immaculately dressed in a gorgeous overcoat, and he came knocking at the door and asked for Tina. Well, okay, Tina, John's here. She just comes bounding out. She just adored him.
Mm-hmm.
But while he's standing there, I saw a little black nose come out from under his overcoat, and they brought her a little poodle for Christmas.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Shirley assured me that if I did it right, I could raise poodles and send Tina to college. That was the aim. Well, the first time the poodle had puppies, she had one. She had two, one died, and the one that was remaining went to the people who owned the mail. So that was not working out too well. The second time, she had two poodles, and one went to the, I think one of those died too. We were not getting anywhere raising poodles. And the third time I took her to a kennels to keep her while I was moving, and she was in estrus, and the lady called and says, I hate to tell you this, but my whippet got to your poodle, and I think you're going to have puppies. Those were the weirdest dogs I've ever seen in my life. Very nervous. There were two of long legs and this wild black hair going every direction.
These years that they were so attached to your daughter, what years were they exactly?
I would say around 64, 65, 1964, 65.
Do you know, how long had the Cozy Club been in operation?
Oh, quite a while, but see, I wasn't terribly old at that time, and I didn't go out much, and I knew of its existence on the sandbar.
They were just getting ready to go through all the urban renewal about that time, too.
Oh, it was quite a while prior to that.
Prior to it?
Shirley and John tended to be watched closely on account of liquor being sold down there without a license, and at that time I was a court reporter, and I ran into them in court quite a bit.
Around liquor violations?
Mm-hmm. But they were still great friends, and what they did in their business was not my affair. I liked them both very much.
Anything else you can tell us about them?
No, John met quite an untimely death. I don't know whether you recall. He went out in the country and got stuck, and I don't know whether he panicked or there were lots of rumors what could have happened to him, but he died draped over a barbed wire fence and died of exposure. Shirley moved back to Omaha, and we kept track of each other until one Christmas I did not get a card from her. So I wrote, I knew she was an apartment house, and I just wrote to manager at this address in Omaha, and she wrote back and said that Shirley had died. And I suppose that's been 5 or 6 years ago. Kept in touch.
Do you know if she has any relatives in Omaha?
No, I don't think she has anybody. Shirley, as far as I know, had no one. And when she lost John, she was devastated.
Do you know about what year that was?
When she died,
When John died?
gosh, no, it had to have been in the 70s, late 70s probably.
We've gotten a lot of clippings from the archives at Casper College, but I don't recall seeing anything about that, do you?
It didn't say anything. You mean about John's death?
Mm-hmm.
No, I think it was a bit, and that was about it.
There was never any suspicion of foul play or anything like that?
Well, yes, I didn't want to say it, but there
Yeah.
was very definitely a suspicion of foul play, but it quieted down, so I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Shirley did call Frank that day and ask if my son would take her out somewhere in the Alcova area, and because she was concerned about John. And he was all 13. I really didn't want to get him involved in anything that was not just right. And she was right. He was dead when I found him.
Mm-hmm. He'd been missing for a while then, huh?
No, just a day.
Just a day.
She told me he'd gone out, and she was worried about him, and would my son take her out and see if he was all right.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a lot of little things going on in the background that they were in court many times, and
Could you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
you want me to?
Yes. Don't worry, these students have heard a lot in this project.
Well, Shirley, I think, had some girls. She always introduced them to me as her niece.
Mhm.
Very, very pretty girls.
Mm.
And at that time, she was in where the, on North Park, where the mission is.
Mhm.
She had rooms there. I don't know that she rented too many of them, except for very brief times.
So she was involved in prostitution?
Yes, I think she was in there.
Mhm.
I think.
Mhm. And what other kinds of things were taken into court? And it's all part
Well,
of the history.
mostly the
huh?
cozy club and after hours and selling liquor without a license. And, well, it was a bottle club, and you took your bottle and you put your name on it.
Mm.
But if you didn't have one there, you could always get it.
We've had conflicting reports. We've been told that maybe you know nothing about this, but we've been told that the Grays would not let blacks come into the Cozy Club. We've been told that the Grays would let some blacks come in, depending on what night it is and who else was there patronizing the place. Do you have any knowledge of that?
I don't believe, as a general rule, they were very well liked by the black community. That's why I don't know, and maybe that's one of the reasons.
Yeah.
I wasn't in the Cozy Club maybe 2 or 3 times. She was a Democrat, and she'd have rallies down there at the Cozy Club. Those were in the days when Ray Whitaker was county attorney. It was a wide open town. I was born in a wide open area, so I was never shocked by what went on.
I think that's neat. I think took that interest in your daughter too. Anything else?
I
you
couldn't
can- yeah.
believe, and the little Meaning girl was part of these little outings, and they'd end up in Washington Park on the swings and on the little things you what do you call them, merry-go-round.
Yeah.
And Tina just adored them. And some of the, I remember one Christmas she showed up with this black velvet jumper with beautiful applique and new shoes. We weren't poor, but she just felt like she had to have this little girl dressed just right. I sewed. She was dressed very well, but Shirley always had to buy her something for Christmas. Well, as a matter of fact, she bought her a diamond ring once. You had to have a microscope maybe to see the diamond, but this little girl got a diamond when she was about 7. She lost it. It didn't last any time at all. I'm sorry, I've had laryngitis.
Oh, that's okay. Did they, after John died, then she closed the Cozy Club and left, or?
Well, you know, they had another cozy club out by the Texas Refinery called the Muzzleloaders. That was the Muzzleloaders, if you're familiar with that was a name for a good way to get a name for a club that could open their own bar. And the Muzzleloaders Association is what they were involved with at that time. I should have gone through some of my memories before I got here.
If you think of anything after you leave, I'm going to give you my phone numbers.
Okay.
So they had the Cozy Club down the Sandbar, then the Muzzleloaders out by the Texaco Refinery, running both of those.
And then she had some sort of operation going on there at North Park.
Yep, okay.
I'm not sure. She had a huge kitchen, and I think she might have still. Later, that place was a nursing home because my grandmother was in it. And then later, the mission.
That very building. So what happened after John died then? What did she do?
I think she lived on Conwell. At about the 300 or 400 block on North Conwell. I've driven by in the house. I don't believe it's even standing anymore. She sort of was a recluse for a while, and we've had her up the house for dinner, and she enjoyed coming up. And then she moved back to Omaha. And from then on, it was letters.
The Cozy Club eventually moved right over there on East F Street somewhere, didn't it?
Oh, it might be, but not during their lifetime.
Okay. Did she sell it to somebody, or no?
I don't know that she had anything to sell except maybe a liquor supply. But I'm sure they didn't own the building. Maybe they did. And of course, then that building was torn down. And they never were on F Street. I think she was gone by the time that moved there.
And there was never an investigation into John's death then?
Not to my knowledge.
Norma, do you have any other knowledge of the African American history here?
No, I've gone to school. You see, the black people in Casper are minorities. There are not many, or maybe there are more now. But I knew very few. The Miners and the Crutchers and the Jacksons. They were later, I didn't know too many things. And the Davises. The kids used to call him Stinky Davis. I can't remember his name, but he'd be about 75 years old now. He's a very good athlete.
Yep. We've interviewed him.
Have you?
Yeah.
Where is he?
Where is he? He's here.
Oh, is he in Casper?
Yeah, he goes to my church.
Was he a postman?
Huh?
Was he a postman and mail letter carrier?
He was.
Yeah, I think so.
His name's Robert Davis. We've interviewed him and his sister, Knox, Helen Knox.
Were you aware of the Hunts? Their family, do you know any of the Hunts?
Yeah.
Their son went on to be very active in dancing, ballet in Chicago, I believe. That would be Scott. And Noelle was a little deaf girl. It was a darling girl that I got acquainted with.
Noelle?
Noelle Hunt.
Do you know the parents' names?
They're both dead, but, I could find out. I still hear from Noelle Hunt. Her son is now in charge of a dance company in New York. I occasionally hear from him.
Wow.
Always a Christmas card.
You might, if you have a few minutes, drop her a line and let her know about our project. I'd love to talk to her.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Now, when I heard from her this Christmas, I didn't get a card, and I always do. She told me she's going to Alaska. And I thought, well, she must have thought, and yet I got a card from her son from her same address, so somebody's down there. It's hard to call her because she can't hear.
What we're seeing in this project is that so many of these families, the parents have died and the children have gone off, the other parts of the world, because there's really very little opportunity for them here in Casper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Mrs. Hunt and Noel's sister were killed in a car accident between here and Denver. And I went to the funeral, and you could not get into St. Mark's Church. It was so full. Everybody loves the Hunt family.
Have we heard about the Hunts before?
I
It's new to me too.
Very nice people.
must have heard it like in the very beginning.
Yeah.
She married a basketball player here at the college. I think his name is now Clark, Noel Clark. No, it's Mason, because I think she divorced Clark and married Mason. But I never met either one of her husbands.
The Crutchers are the ones that have the magazine stand, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've heard from.
Pete. He always
We
lived
heard
in the
from
Alpha
his daughter.
Maxine.
Betty Thompson is her
Betty
name.
Crutcher.
Yeah. And she's supposed to be mailing us some information, which I'm be excited to get. I haven't gotten it yet.
Another one I'm trying to, Bert Miner. Have you heard of him? And I remember.
Well,
I've graduated from high school 55 years ago, so.
Those years roll by, don't
I
they?
remember.
We really appreciate your sharing, this
Oh, I'm glad
information. It's
to.
very much a part of the history.
Supplied. Have I helped any? Well, good.
Yes, definitely.
Good.
We appreciate it very much, Nora. Thank you.
Oh, it's nice, Howard.
I'm going to take a picture of you too, as we take those for our files.
Numbers.
Huh?
And the phone number.
237. Oh.
Put some light on there.
Oh, that'll break the camera.
No. Thank you.
Buddy is my first name. Murphy, M-U-R-P-H-Y.
And your first name?
Joseph, J-O-S-E-P-H. P. M-D. I'm a doctor, M-D.
If they ask any questions or I ask any questions you really don't want to answer, you have that option too. Okay.
I can take my Fifth
Yes,
Amendment
you
right.
can say it. I'll pass on that one.
Okay.
Can we have your date of birth?
5 August 1927.
And your address?
3200 Hawthorne, Hawthorne Avenue, Casper, 82604.
How long have you lived in Casper?
Well, I was born here, but I was gone from age 16 through probably age 30. With that exception, I've lived all the rest of the time here.
Who were your parents, Dr. Marcus?
Patrick and Hester, Hester Murphy.
So you attended the public schools here, or were you in?
Yes, I did go to the parochial school, St. Anthony, and then I went to and graduated from NCHS.
What year did you graduate from UC?
Well, that gets complicated. I graduated in 1944. I was the first official dropout from NC. I left in 44, though I was in the class of 45. So I left high school at the end of my junior year. So I guess the answer is I graduated in 44. I was in the class of 45.
Ages 16 through 30, where were you?
Pardon?
You said you didn't live here from ages 16 through
Oh,
30, where were
I
you?
was University of Notre Dame, where I graduated in 1945. So I had my high school reunion and my college reunion the same year, 45. And then I was in medical school at Loyola, L-O-Y-O-L-A, medical school in Chicago from 45 to 49. I was an intern at the University of Colorado General Hospital in Denver, 49 and 50. And a resident in internal medicine there from 50 to 51. Then I went to Japan, where I was a medical officer in Japan for a year and was a Korean MASH unit. In 52, back to the States in 53. Finished my residency in June of 55. To make it simple. Then practiced in Denver for a year and a half and returned to Casper on the 1st of January, 1957.
And opened a private practice there.
Went into the Casper Clinic. And I was in the Casper Clinic through 1984. Then had my own private office through 87. And since then, I've been semi-retired.
Dr. Murphy, could you talk to us about your knowledge of the African American community here? Anything that you know?
It's a broad question.
You can start anywhere you like.
Well, coming back in 1957, Holly, I'm having a little difficulty establishing my first contact as far as time. My first contact was being one of the founders of the Casper Interracial Council. That was its official name. A group of 6 or 8 of us that eventually grew to about 10 got together, sensed that things were happening nationally, and if happening nationally likely were happening locally. And so we formed the Casper Interracial Council. The 3 main people, as I recall, doing that were Peter Koopman, Reverend Peter Koopman, Koopman, of the First Presbyterian Church in Casper. Father James Power, who was the pastor of St. Patrick's Catholic Church, and myself, and Don Jackson of the African American community. Those were the prime movers early on. Dr. Robert Fowler, a Casper pediatrician, was with us. A woman who I have tried all morning to remember her name, black woman, maybe you could help us, Josh. Her son became a hematologist, a doctor, and practicing medicine in Detroit. She was killed in an automobile accident. I remember the day that I went to her house, met other members of the family there when she was killed. But I can't recall her fast name. Dr. Don Jackson will know her name because he reminded me of her once, not too long ago, in my advancing years. See, right now I remember when Frank Sinatra was a child, being 15, 20 years older than he was. So but that was a core group, and we met on a regular basis, and our effort was to head off any trouble in Casper, and even further than that was to advance the cause of the African American community in Casper in terms of employment, social setting. We tried to extend the group, I remember very expressly, to the Spanish population of Casper, the Hispanic population, but we were not successful in that regard. So what work we did accomplish was accomplished primarily between the black and the white community of Casper. And there was a time when we were quite active, and it is probably fair to say that it was the precursor of the group now in Casper that puts on the Martin Luther King stage here and the banquet, so we didn't have one this year, and the march downtown and all. That was probably around, I told the newspaper I thought it was around 60 or 61. More likely it was 62, as best I can tell. My involvement became even more pronounced in the group when my high school classmate, Jim Reeb, was killed violently, maliciously in Selma, Alabama in 1964. He and I had graduated, well, we were in the class of 45 at NCHS and had been good friends. His wife was a very close friend of my, Marie, her name, was a very close friend of my wife, Rita's. In fact, they had often walked to school together and were growing up friends together. So when Jim was murdered, that became a major item in Casper. We had a memorial parade from the, I should have brought the column that I've written for the newspaper about that. From the courthouse up to NCHS auditorium, and two other classmates joined in this with me in putting on the memorial. Patrick Meenan, who was the mayor of the city at that time. And so that worked out just fine. And Frank Bowron, who came, and the three of us spoke. I'm quickly looking for, I shouldn't, here's where memory betrays you, the president of the NAACP came out and marched with us and spoke to us at that time.
The national president?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the national president was in Casper for a day. We hosted him here in Casper for a day, and it's important we get his name in here. I'm looking under NAACP, which is here. Oh, goodness me. I thought it was here. Yeah, on page 227. I meant to look this up this morning, but we got Roy Wilkins. He was Roy, Wilkins, flew to Casper for the service, and he was the prime speaker of that. We had a good-sized crowd. We filled the 3/4 of NCHS gymnasium of Casper people. Many of the faiths in Casper were represented, ministers from the faith. Father Powers was the Catholic representative there. One of my sharpest recollections was not a very pleasant one for my own faith. The night before, a friend and I, Pete Godick, Goedicke, went down to the rectory of the Catholic Church here in Casper. The bishop was in town, the bishop from Cheyenne, for a confirmation service, and we wanted him to be present and represent the Catholic Church, the bishop. His name was Hubert M. Newell, Newell. But he was too busy to see us, and said he would not be at the following day's service. Pete and I were Catholics, and we thought, my God, the entire nation, the attention of the nation is on Casper, Wyoming. All major networks covered it, ABC, NBC, and CBS. And we thought it only appropriate that we have, because we had, I believe we had the bishop of the Anglican faith up from Laramie, but the Bishop Newell couldn't. And I've always been a little bit perturbed at that. And yet I came across this. This was March 20th, 1965. So it wasn't 64, it was 1965. Dear Dr. Murphy, I thank you for your gracious note of the 17th. I was pleased to see that our Catholic laymen and clergy had so prominent a part in the tribute to the Reverend James Reed, and I was pleased to contribute a message, however brief. Best wishes. Sincerely in Christ, Hubert M. Newell, Bishop of Cheyenne. So Jim died in 1995. It was, why did I thought I'd said 90. Yeah, he died, he was attacked the night of March 8th, 1965 in Selma, Alabama. Well, that put Casper right on the map as far as what was going on. President Lyndon Johnson mentioned Casper as the home of Jim. Jim was always a bit of an enigma. You kids might understand. All going through high school, his name was James Rape, R-A-P-E. But when he decided to go into the ministry, which he did, who do you want to say, Reverend Rape? Mm-hmm. And he officially changed his name to James Reed. But if you ask any Casper people who knew him in his childhood and his high school years, it was James Rape instead of James Reed. A very thoughtful, quiet, studious, religious person who started out as a Presbyterian, but was ordained into the Unitarian Church, and was pastor of that church in Washington, D.C. at the time, at their main church there at the time, that the civil rights movement began with the marches through the South with Martin Luther King and all. And Jim went down to participate in that marches, and march with Martin Luther King. Has anybody told you what happened to Jim Reed, any of the people? Well, perhaps I'm as qualified as any, because I was his Casper doctor and his lifelong friend here in Casper. 3 ministers, and this was on public broadcasting here a matter of just about 4 months ago. They had an excellent documentary on it. 3 ministers went in after marching all day that day to a restaurant in Selma, Alabama. They came out. One is now dead. One of the other 2 is dead. One is still alive, and he played a prominent part in that particular documentary by public broadcasting system. They were met on the street by three hoodlums, and I don't know any better name, who literally clubbed Jim to death. They were called intruders, white trash coming in from the north to try and get involved in the Negro problem, as the term in those days was used. And Jim was struck on Monday, as I see from the back of the book here, March 8, 1965, and was hospitalized at the University of Alabama Hospital. And I believe it was on Wednesday or Thursday he died. And he became immediately a national martyr to the cause because he was one of the first white people killed in the South. Later on, there were others in other cities. But Jim being a minister, an ordained minister, being white, having come in from Boston and Washington, where he had been, he became quite well known on the national scene. I remember it led the news. It got in its own way as much press, you might say, as Frank Sinatra has gotten in the last 24 hours. Jim's ashes are scattered in the Casper area, over Casper Mountain, is my understanding, and over Alcova Lake. So perhaps one of the absolutely best known individuals of the civil rights era in America was from Casper, Wyoming. And that, of course, gave great validity to our Casper Interracial Council. And so we, at that time, met with the mayor, which was no problem because Pat Meenan was our graduate from the same year at NCHS, and made ourselves known and available to the black community in Casper, the black American community, Afro-American community, to be available to them if they had any complaints the way they were being treated in their job situation or being discriminated against in any way. I'm not entirely sure how long the Casper Interracial, I took a lot of notes on it. I keep a journal, but life has gotten complicated as it's gone on, and I've had 12 children and the practice of medicine and all. I can't locate them at the moment. They are home. They are in some box in my basement and might have some historical import someday. I'll dig them out.
You don't have to say might, they do.
So I will find them. And from that sprung up the local group that is functioning now, that I was part of the first year, but have been less and less a part of, perhaps for age reasons, since that particular time. 2 years ago, the group gave me the James M. Reeb Award, which is a lovely plaque which I have in my home for a lifetime of commitment to civil rights of all peoples, and I value that very, very much. We didn't have one this year. The one before was given to my good friend, who's the principal at East Junior High, Mel Hamilton. Mel was the first one of the black 14 at the University of Wyoming. He got the first James M. Reeb Award, I got the second one, and we're waiting on the third one to see who that might be. Growing up in Casper, there were black students in my class, a handful, at NCHS, but I didn't really know they were black. Bert Miner was a black student, MINOR, who lives in Denver right now. I met him at a class reunion not all that long ago. I knew him as the fastest kid in the class. He was the state 100-yard dash champion and a wonderful person. And if somebody had asked me to describe him, I don't want to say I'm naive enough to be totally colorblind, but I probably somewhere down the line would have said, oh yes, and Bert was black. To many of us, that made absolutely no problem at all. So I would say in those days, the amount of prejudice present in our local high schools, in our local community, seemed relatively small to we who were of the white race, but as we met in our meetings and discussed the situation in town, it was not all that nice for those who were black. First off, if you were black in those days, it was just automatic that you lived in North Casper. What's your address, Josh?
5110 South Road.
South Oak? Oh, God, man.
Is this up by Sunrise?
Yeah. Well, let's be moving back where you belong, young man. And that's somewhere down north, the other side of the tracks. Now, I'm not disparaging North Casper because that's where my wife grew up, where she was living when she wasn't living when she was born, but that's where they took her home to from the hospital. And but I would have to honestly say back in the early 40s, mid-40s, during the Second World War, there were no black people in Casper who dared move past the railroad tracks into South Oak. Hey,
They
how'd
weren't
you
allowed to
manage it?
move past that. You know.
Took a long while, yeah. I was blessed in medical practice over the years by having many of the black community of town see me as their doctor, which I always considered a privilege. I really did, not just being unctuous about it. Hold for just a moment. Turn your camera down, off. Anything.
Pause.
Pause.
Yeah.
As recollection serves me, and we're going back now 40 years, I'm 70 years of age now, and all of this was happening when I was in my early 30s. The same problems that we still have now in terms of getting blacks fair opportunities in employment, that was likely the greatest. I have no recollections of any black individual visiting with us on our council as far as any treatment of a physical nature that could be attributed to the fact that they were black and we were white. All things equal, for being such a conservative state as Wyoming is, and one in which you might have thought that there could have been that sort of problem, just overt discrimination.
There was.
I have no doubt there was, or we wouldn't have formed our group. But I myself never remember being part of it either in my schooling here. Now, I left Casper when I was 16 years of age. I was a physician when I was 21. That all happened away from Casper, and I didn't return to Casper until I was 30, and it was sometime shortly thereafter that we formed our council committee. But my growing up experience in Casper was limited to the first 16 years of age. How old are you, Steph? 15, yeah. See, I left when I was 16, so my judgments of Casper were of good friends.
Did the council hear of instances?
My recollection is yes. We felt there was a reason for our being together, and part of the reason, and I'm fairly sure of this recollection, part of the reason is that if a group of people who in any way had any recognition within the community, a Presbyterian minister, a Catholic priest, 2 Casper doctors, if we gathered together and said, hey, we are a group and we don't want any difficulties in our town, we want to all live as neighbors and friends in community, the very fact of our existence would be helpful. Now, if somebody can come before you and say, well, I remember when this happened to so-and-so because he was black and he was set upon by a group of white thugs. Hey, I know it happened. I'm minus a close friend who was bludgeoned to death. But to actually say that I was aware of anything like that happening at that time, I don't know. I don't know. I'm quoted in the book, not extensively, but the man who wrote the book, Duncan Howlett, came to Casper and interviewed me at some length at that time about what I could tell him about the subject of his book, Jen Reed. And the conversations, he describes one conversation we had on the church steps of the Presbyterian Church, and it had nothing to do with racial relations. It had to do with religion. Both of us were. He was firm and set in his Presbyterian religion. I guess I was firm and set in my Catholic religion, and so we did not argue religion, but we debated religion and its place in our life. Well, he went on to make it everything in his life by becoming an ordained minister, and I hope it's played a reasonably prominent part in my life. But to say, Holly, that specific instances, no, I have no recollection of those. But we tried to get what publicity we could from the Casper Tribune. I'll have to run a search someday here in the library files of the Tribune. They have this all on microfilm. The newspapers. We felt to a large extent our very existence was somewhat of a protection against other type of problems. We felt that it wasn't only a problem with the Afro-American community, but that it was a problem with the Hispanic community. Though I'm not so sure Hispanic was the term used in those days. I think the Mexican community, the Spanish community. But we had great difficulty, if not abject failure, in getting anyone from that community to join in with us and make it truly a all-embracing council of people who might and did suffer discrimination. No, I'm not saying it didn't exist, but
do you have any recollections through the years then, when you were active with this council or with any church or whatever, of incidents of the Ku Klux Klan trying to come in and hinder those kinds of things? Can you share that with us?
Skip forward now to 1989 and the Equality Day parade. That was started by Don Tolan, T-O-L-I-N, who is a Jewish man, a lawyer here in Casper. Tom Strook, who was a state senator at that time, myself. We held a meeting because Dick Cheney, who was our representative in Congress, and after whom they are going to name the old post office building, the Cheney building, had dropped out of Congress and had become the chief of staff for Gerald Ford. I guess he was chief of staff for Gerald Ford first and then became a congressman. And he dropped out and his seat came open. And a man who now, I should have pulled those records out, I've got a whole page framed up in our cabin on the mountain. I got involved. One of our relatives had surgery, major surgery, and we got a call early this morning, so my thoughts are a little disjointed. A relative I feel very close to, who has taken a very bad turn for the worse and apparently gone into renal failure over in Ogden, Utah. And so they're going to call us back, and that call will probably be waiting for me when I get home. had a meeting. It was held, as I recall, at the Casper Event Center, because this man was bringing into Casper skinheads from Idaho. Idaho had become, and yet is, a local territory for the Aryan, A-R-Y-A-N, Aryan nation, up in northern Idaho. And he had brought in, and at one time it was reported, though I never saw them as a unit, that there were up to 20 skinheads, members of the Aryan nation who came into Casper. And this man preached a gospel of white supremacy. We love everyone, but the white race is the race, the only race. He filed for Congress, the U.S. representative, the position that Barbara Cuban has right now. And we got together, the Jewish lawyer, Tom Struck, myself, and a whole room full of people I'm ignoring. And we let it be known through the press that he was not welcome in Casper. He was a carpetbagger. He had established 90-day residence, as I recall, and that was all that was necessary to get on the state ballot.
Do you remember his name?
No, I wrote a newspaper column about him, and don't think I know I used his name in that. This is all what I was going to pull out and bring some of those columns, and they're still available to you, but when I got this call about the illness in the family, and my wife is away, and it's her immediate relative, and I was reach her, she's out shopping somewhere. So I didn't get the, but we will get his name, because he's important to the historical perspective.
I'm going to leave you with my phone number so that when you get that schedule,
Yeah,
you call me.
yeah, I certainly will. And
And we just copy things and I'll get the originals back to you.
and I wrote a column. I write columns for the Tribune here, and I wrote a column about him. So we'll get the name. And we took out a full page, and we met ad in the Casper paper inviting the entire community of Casper. Well, that was 9 years ago. I believe that was, it wasn't 89, it was 88. I believe it was 89. We gathered in City Park, catty corner from the Catholic Church across from the Elks building, and we marched down the street. Governor Mike Sullivan led the parade, and hand in hand we went down to the courthouse, and the message was very clear. We are the equality state, and we are not having anybody coming in here to tell us that white supremacy holds forth and is the play of the day. Shortly thereafter, he left Casper. He had been in Casper, he left Casper, and as far as I know, he's been unheard since. He did send me a copy of his book. I have a copy of the book in which he was detailing how, and he saw the proximity of Wyoming to Idaho and to Montana made it a very fertile ground, so he thought, for bringing in his idea of racial supremacy. And so we quickly gathered together, and there were members from our original group who joined back in, though basically it was a fairly new group, because now we're talking 20 to 30 years later, from 1965, 75, 85, so about 23, 24 years later. And we ran him out of the state. We got him off the ticket, ran him out of the state, and he never even stood for election. So, yes, when you mention about the Ku Klux Klan, no, I have no memory of the Ku Klux Klan being involved. I do know the history of the Ku Klux Klan as it applies to the sweatsuit I'm wearing here with Notre Dame on it. Ku Klux Klan invaded Notre Dame and had to be chased off campus and all. back in the days that the Ku Klux Klan was quite large and big. But not in Casper. To my knowledge, they have not been here, other than in the guise of skinheads.
There are a couple isolated incidents that we've learned about, but, you know, there was no major. What about the Equality Coalition, Dr. Murphy? You were involved with that, weren't you?
Well, I was involved with that at its beginning.
What was it? What, you know, could you tell us?
The equality, I wasn't the one that really was one of the founding members of it, but having worked with the group that I worked with 20, 30 years before, I was invited to their meetings, and our major effort was to get Martin Luther King Day declared a holiday in the state of Wyoming. We were one of the 4 states that didn't have an official holiday. We have succeeded. And at the moment, as best I know, there's only one state that does not have it, and that's New Hampshire at the moment, unless they've done something dramatic in the last year that I didn't notice. So that was our big thing. And out of the coalition came the Martin Luther King Day celebration, declaring it a school holiday, having the parade that we have, the ceremony, turning into a whole week as it was this past week.
I think it's kind of fallen apart now, because what happened was our group here discovered that nobody was doing anything to plan that Martin Luther King rally this year. And so we managed to, I put an ad in the paper that we were having a meeting, you know, an organizational meeting. We managed to throw something together for this last year. But I think we have 3 black ministers now here who are really committed to seeing that this whole thing moves on.
That will certainly help, because I talked to Mel Hamilton, and I said, Mel, I went up to his Black 14 film presentation. Were you there that night, Holly? I thought I saw you. And I said, so when are we going to have the banquet? He says, well, we're not quite yet ready for it, but I'll let you know within the next week. And that's been, what now, 3 months, 4 months?
It's Mel and Nick Murdoch who just, Nick was in the middle of all that litigation around Amoco.
Yes. Nick Murdoch was the one who has worked tremendously hard on that. I give him as much credit for anybody. But I remember on many an occasion going down to Nick's office and over his legal table like this, sitting and planning the Martin Luther Day King activities. It had a prime focus, and that was to get Martin Luther Day King into the state of Wyoming, and to celebrate, and to make it a holiday, which we were in the minority of states by far not having it so. Whereas our Casper Interracial Council, I don't know that it had a specific target. It was to be available because we saw things happening. We, of course, did not see Martin Luther King being shot, but once that happened, Jim Reeb died, and then Martin Luther King was shot. All these dreadful things came. So we simply wanted to have a sounding board for the city of Casper in Roanoke County, that if any problems did begin. Well, in the meantime, there were riots in Detroit and burnings of buildings, and in addition to the assassinations of people. Casper didn't anticipate any of that, as far as I would have thought. But at the same time, we at least had a nucleus of people who were interested that would get together and take whatever appropriate action we thought we could take. I do not recall any specific time, losing some of the impact of your film and your book, where we stepped in and rode in as the cowboy on, of course, the white horse. He couldn't be on a black horse, you know, and saved the day for everybody. It was more what I would like to think it was, a moral presence within the community. And any one of us had a constituency. Certainly the Protestant leaders had their constituency. And even though my experience over the years has been zero to very little cooperation from my own church, which does not make me at all happy. In the Equality Day Parade, I will say I talked to 2 of the 3 pastors in Casper and asked them if they would march with us. And I was in what I thought rather abrupt and no uncertain terms told that this was not a problem that fell within the scope of their religious duties. Well, it's a moral problem, and it shook my faith in the underlying situation. Now, to tell you, I will be going to Catholic Mass tonight. And in the in the St. Anthony's parochial church in town, there will be one black. And that black will be the priest celebrating the Mass. I know him only as Father Michael, but he is from Nigeria. He's on loan to the United States because we are short of priests. And I have his, I got this along at the last minute. Now I can't find it. Because his last, oh yeah, it's under a picture that he has. And would you guess that that person is black, Josh? Look kind of black to you, doesn't he? Well, he is the assistant Catholic pastor in Casper at the moment.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he is just a marvelous person. We love him. And he's got his name underneath there. So you might say, for all the difficulties I've had with trying to involve my own church in this, Father Powers was fine, but not too long after this left, he became ill and went back to Ireland, from whence he came, and died not too long thereafter. So, Father Michael Ehremere, E-H-I-E-M-E-R-E. There is a Catholic priest in Casper now, and he says the 5:15 Catholic Mass every Saturday night at St. Anthony.
My principal's Catholic too, Mel is.
Who is?
Mel Hamilton.
Yeah, Mel Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
He became Catholic, I believe, while he was at Boys Town in Nebraska and all. And he sang in the choir at Christmas Eve Mass here a couple of years ago, and he was up there, and I was tempted to say, Mel, you don't do that in a Catholic church. You can go down to the black parishes in town, and people clap, and it's joyous. My wife and I, our favorite Catholic parish in the Rocky Mountains is St. Martin de Porres, P-O-R-R-E-S, who is a Catholic saint, and it's in Denver, out near Stapleton Airport, and it's an all-black parish. And boy, you go down there, and when you come away, you feel like you have the liturgical celebration that the Catholic Church offers.
Spirit-filled, yeah.
And yet you have the spirit that is offered, having attended services at the black parishes in town.
Dr. Murphy, like I said, anything you have, anecdotal, anything that we can possibly include in a book, in the future, we would really love to make copies.
Well, if I get my act together, even though you've certainly given me enough time, Holly, I think I can come up with some of it. Yes. I guess if I were to summarize, I would say we were at least partially prepared for all the social changes that have occurred nationally in the last 40 years by having our Casper Interracial Council. 2, I don't think we have been stressed into their use, with the exception of having a core group of people, plus many others, who came together for the Casper Equality Day Parade. And 3rd, the fact that we have accomplished, through the coalition, we have accomplished getting the Martin Luther King Day as a holiday. And what you tell me, I was not aware of, but I was aware that it did not come to pass this year that we had our banquet. Even though Mel Hamilton said, well, just give us another week, give us another week. What happened? I ask you.
They were too busy. What has happened?
Nick was too busy.
Yeah, I think what has happened is the banquet plan has just fallen on Nick's and Mel's shoulders.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it needs to expand now. You know, it just they were just too busy.
Could we form another interracial council in Casper as we did in the early mid-60s? I think so.
Oh, I'm sure it would be a good idea. I think the grassroots project, the one that Janet Dupree was so involved in,
I
is
get all
stepping in
of their
and taking
mail.
a lot of that.
That has taken on much, even though it is spread out into other areas too.
Yeah, they're involved in all sorts of issues that are.
Different decades have their, in my judgment, now I'm kind of philosophizing off the cuff, different decades have their major problems. Certainly the late 50s, all of the 60s, into the 70s, for the civil rights movement. The grassroots project now has certainly great utility in terms of the gay lesbian situation and how to help our gay and lesbian youth so that they do not, on the national average of 3 to 5 to 1, commit suicide more frequently than straight youth. And I have put quite a bit of time, not into the Grassroots Coalition, but my fight at the moment is on this gay lesbian situation. Fighting my own University, Notre Dame, I've written columns about that. Prejudice is with us. It's unfortunately part of the human situation. I'm testing the outer limits myself at the moment in my own personal life. You may notice my hearing aids. They've only been in a couple of weeks. I came out in a column in the newspaper a year ago in which I revealed that I was a GEM, gender-enhanced male. I thought the world would come apart. Been no reaction to it whatsoever, at least directly to me. I'm not naive enough to think that there hasn't been a lot of pillow talk at night or something of that sort. And in a sense, you could say this is an external manifestation of an internal drive within me. And this group is now very much in the question of whether they should ally themselves with a gay and lesbian group nationally, internationally, because there are surprisingly a significant number of people, an estimated 5% of the male population, even though it's very hard to say. So I too have been in a closet like a gay would have been, or a lesbian would have been, or a black might have tried to be, even though it's a little more difficult for Josh to hide the fact that he's black. You ever been able to hide it? Some white putty and plaster or something, would that work, huh? You know, whereas the gay person, the lesbian person, they can hide it depending upon the circumstances, as I've hidden the fact that I'm a gem. I don't know what's going to be. My dream for the future is that in the next, certainly in your lifetime, the young people here, unlikely in my lifetime, that what color you are won't make a bit of difference. Josh will be able to move up on South Oak Street. Now, I don't know that day will ever But it hasn't. It sure wouldn't have happened when I was your age, I'll tell you. You would have been run out of town on a rail, as they say. And that the grassroots movement will not really have any need to be in this type of situation, to even be in existence. But for the time being, I guess my only contribution is I've been part of different peoples at one time or another running around trying to stamp out pockets of prejudice. Simple as that. And it was so obvious that it was happening across the nation. And then when Jim Reeve got involved, when the guy comes with his Ku Klux Klanners, skinheads, they aren't Ku Klux Klan, I guess, technically, but the skinhead and the Aryan Nation fall in that same group of people. So I think the way I could perhaps help the most is get my own files organized so that I'm not trying to say now, who was that that da-da-da-da-da-da. I think Mel has been a great help in town. He's been a role model for kids in his educational role. He represents the successful athlete, successful educator, and that's great.
He has not had an easy time of it either, though. He's run into racism even in his job, right, as a principal.
I don't have any doubt whatsoever about that. Do I think that there is no racism